My house was destroyed by a devastating fire. At 65 years old, I went to seek refuge at my son's house, but he rejected me, claiming his girlfriend needed privacy. Desperate, I called my high school sweetheart, a man I hadn't seen in 4 decades. When he opened the door to his mansion, he said 3 words, "You're finally back." My life changed forever. But before I continue, make sure you are subscribed to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching this video from. We love knowing how far our stories reach. My name is Eleanor, and at 65, I thought I had already experienced every type of suffering life could offer. I was wrong. It all started on a Wednesday that seemed just like any other in Portland, Oregon. I was in the kitchen, brewing my afternoon coffee when I caught a strange smell. I decided to check, thinking maybe I had left something on the stove. When I opened the door to the living room, I was met by a wall of smoke so thick I could barely see through it. The flames were already consuming the curtains and climbing the walls with a speed that left me paralyzed for a few crucial seconds. The smoke detector should have gone off, but I discovered later that the battery had died months ago. A simple oversight that would cost me everything I had. I ran back to the kitchen, trying to reach the phone to call 911, but the smoke was already everywhere, making it hard to breathe, impossible to think clearly. I heard glass shattering and realized I didn't have time. The flames were consuming my house with a voracious hunger that seemed impossible to contain. My only thought was to get out of there alive. I grabbed my purse from the kitchen table and ran toward the back door. The last thing I saw before leaving was the portrait of Richard, my late husband, beginning to blacken from the heat. The neighbors were already in the street when I came out, coughing and stumbling. Mrs. Higgins, my 78-year-old neighbor, was the first to approach, hugging me as we both watched helplessly while the flames devoured the house where I had lived for over 40 years. The fire department arrived in 10 minutes, but it was already too late. They managed to prevent the fire from spreading to the neighboring houses, but mine was beyond salvation. In just 1 hour, 4 decades of memories were reduced to ash. The kitchen table where David used to do his homework, the walls that held the pencil marks of my son's growth, the bedroom I shared with Richard for 37 years, everything was gone. I stood on the sidewalk, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over my shoulders, while the firefighters did their job. Later, they would tell me it was likely a short circuit in an old outlet in the living room. A simple electrical issue that turned my life into ruins. The flames finally subsided, leaving only a blackened, smoking structure. The fire chief approached with a face smudged with soot, his eyes filled with a compassion I couldn't bear in that moment. "I'm so sorry, ma'am. We did what we could." But he didn't need to finish the sentence. I could see it for myself. Total loss. Everything I owned, aside from the clothes on my back and the contents of my purse, had vanished. The neighbors who were lucky enough to still have homes took me in for the first night. Sweet Mrs. Higgins insisted I stay with her, but her small condo was already cramped with her visiting grandchildren. The Red Cross had set up emergency shelters, but the idea of sleeping in a gymnasium full of strangers made me feel even more lost. It was then that I knew I had to call David. My son lives about 40 minutes away in Lake Oswego, in an upscale neighborhood with tree-lined streets and houses that look like they were pulled from magazines. He moved there 4 years ago when he was promoted to regional manager at the insurance firm where he works. We weren't close, not in the way mothers and sons should be, but he was all the family I had left. I used Mrs. Higgins' landline because my cell phone had melted along with everything else. "David, honey, it's Mom," I said, my voice weaker than I intended. "Mom, what happened? You sound upset." "There was a fire, son. The house is gone. Everything is gone." There was a pause that seemed to last an eternity. "Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. Just some scratches and my throat hurts from the smoke, but I need a place to stay while I sort things out. Just temporarily." Another pause. "Of course, Mom. Come over. We'll figure it out." The relief that washed over me was so intense I almost collapsed. My son would take care of me. Despite all our distance, all the missed calls and awkward holiday dinners, he was still my boy. I spent the next morning staring at the charred ruins, waiting for the insurance adjuster to arrive. He showed up promptly at 9 a.m., a young man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else walking through what remained of my home with a clipboard and a camera. "Total loss," he said pragmatically, as if those 2 words didn't represent my entire existence. "How much?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Well, You had a policy for about $200,000 on the structure, but with your deductible and depreciation, we're talking maybe $90,000, maybe less. $90,000 to rebuild 42 years of life. It seemed impossible. Mrs. Higgins helped me buy some basic clothes and toiletries with the emergency cash the Red Cross had given me. Everything I owned now fit into a small, borrowed suitcase. That was it. That was all that remained of the life I had built. The ride to David's house felt like a trip to a foreign country. Everything looked different when you have nowhere to return to. The familiar places, the gas station where I always bought my lottery tickets, the diner where Richard and I used to have breakfast on Sundays, all seemed to belong to someone else's life now. David's neighborhood was immaculate as always. Perfect lawns, perfect sidewalks, perfect lives continuing exactly as they were the day before. I felt like an intruder, bringing my tragedy into their pristine world. His house was a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a red door that Vanessa, his girlfriend, had chosen. I had met her exactly 3 times in the 2 years they had been together. She was 30, and he was 39. She worked at a marketing firm downtown and had opinions on everything, from the color of the walls to the type of wine to serve at dinner. I paid the taxi driver in his driveway and stood still for a moment, gathering my courage. This is temporary, I told myself. Just until I can figure out what comes next. Just until the insurance check arrives and I can find a small apartment somewhere. I never imagined that walking to my son's front door with my small, borrowed suitcase would be one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life. But when I raised my hand to knock, I felt a familiar sensation, the same feeling of emptiness I had when Richard died, as if the ground were disappearing beneath my feet. I just didn't know yet how much deeper I was about to fall. David opened the door before I could knock, as if he had been watching me through the window. For a single moment, seeing his familiar face, Richard's eyes, my stubborn chin made me feel that everything might be okay. He was my son, my only child. Surely blood meant something. "Mom," he said, stepping aside to let me in, but his voice held something I couldn't identify. Distance, perhaps, or discomfort. Vanessa appeared behind him almost immediately, as if she had been waiting in the wings. She was wearing white denim jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than I used to spend on a month's worth of groceries. Her brunette hair was pulled back in one of those messy buns that somehow looked perfectly styled, and her smile was the kind that never reached her eyes. "Eleanor, how awful about your house," she said. But she was looking at my tattered suitcase, not at me. David told me what happened. I set my suitcase down in their immaculate foyer, suddenly conscious of how I must look. My freshly bought clothes, cheap and simple, looked out of place against the polished hardwood floors. I could still smell the smoke embedded in my hair despite the shower I had taken at Mrs. Higgins's place. "It's just temporary," I said quickly, "just until I can get back on my feet." David and Vanessa exchanged a look, one of those wordless conversations couples have, the kind that excludes everyone else in the room. Richard and I had done the same countless times, but from the other side, it felt like I was being shut out of a club I didn't know existed. "Let's sit down and talk," David said, guiding me to the living room. His house was beautiful in the way magazine houses are beautiful. Everything matched. Nothing was out of place. White furniture that looked like no one had ever actually sat on it. Glass coffee tables that reflected the light from windows so clean they seemed invisible. It was the kind of house where you were afraid to touch anything. I sat on the edge of the pristine sofa, my new shoes firmly planted on the spotless rug. Vanessa noticed and flinched slightly. "So, what's the plan?" David asked, settling into the armchair opposite me. Not next to me on the sofa where he could have put his arm around his grieving mother, but across from me, as if we were conducting a business transaction. "Well, the insurance adjuster said it will take a few weeks to process everything, maybe a month. I was hoping I could stay here until then, just until I find a small apartment or something." The silence that followed lasted about 10 seconds longer than it should have. I watched as Vanessa's face changed. I saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She leaned in and put her hand on David's arm, a gesture that looked supportive but was clearly possessive. "Mom," David began, and I knew from his tone that what was coming next would break my heart. "The problem is, Vanessa and I have been talking, and we really value our privacy here. We work long hours, and this is our sanctuary, if you understand." I blinked, not fully comprehending. "I wouldn't get in your way. I'd stay out of sight. I'd help with the cooking. the cleaning. I wouldn't be a burden. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. It's not about being a burden, Eleanor. It's about space. This house is our first home together, and we're still finding our rhythm as a couple. I am his mother, I said, the words coming out sharper than I intended. Of course you are, Vanessa replied smoothly, and that's why we think you'd be more comfortable somewhere else, somewhere you can have your independence while you rebuild. I looked at David, waiting for him to contradict her. To remember that I was the woman who had stayed up with him through every fever, who had worked double shifts to pay for his college textbooks, who had held his hand during his divorce 3 years ago when his ex-wife left him for her personal trainer. Instead, he nodded. Vanessa is right. Mom, we think you'd be happier with your own space. The words hit me like a physical punch. I actually felt my chest tighten, as if someone were squeezing my lungs. Happier, David? I lost everything yesterday. Everything. And you think I'd be happier alone in a hotel room than here with my family? It doesn't have to be a hotel, Vanessa said quickly. There are some lovely extended stay places near the shopping center. Very clean, very safe, and they have kitchenettes so you can cook for yourself. I stared at this woman who had been in my son's life for only 2 years, telling me where I should live after losing my home. And how am I supposed to pay for this lovely extended stay place? The insurance money won't come for weeks. David shifted uncomfortably. I could help with that. A few $100s to get you started. A few $100s. As if I were a distant relative he barely knew, not the woman who gave him life. David, I said, my voice barely a whisper, I changed your diapers. I rocked you through your colic. I taught you to ride a bike and helped you with your homework. I held you when you cried because Lucy Miller broke your heart in high school. His face twisted slightly, but Vanessa squeezed his arm tighter. No one is questioning your history, she said. We just think everyone would be more comfortable with some boundaries. Boundaries. I had heard that word from the therapist David had seen after his divorce. Everything was about boundaries. You're kicking me out, I said flatly. We aren't kicking you out, David protested. We're just saying that maybe this arrangement wouldn't work for anyone. Whose idea was it? I asked, though I already knew the answer. I could see it in the way Vanessa sat back slightly, satisfied, as if she had won something. We discussed it together, David said, but he wouldn't look me in the eye. I stood up slowly, my knees popping in a way that reminded me I was 65 years old and alone in the world. I understand. Mom, don't be like that. We're trying to do what's best for everyone. What's best for everyone? I repeated the words as if they were in a foreign language. What would be best for everyone, David, is if your mother didn't have to sleep on the street tonight. Vanessa's perfectly made-up face contracted into an expression of concern. You don't have to sleep on the street. Like I said, there are options. I looked around the spotless living room once more, at the family photos that included David and Vanessa, but none of me. At the expensive furniture no one was really allowed to live on. At my son, who had chosen this cold, beautiful woman over his own mother. You're right, I said finally. There are always options. I picked up my small suitcase. Its weight felt heavier now that I knew where I wasn't welcome. David stood up, looking uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to change his mind. I'll call you in a few days, he said, as soon as you get settled somewhere. Don't bother, I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I wouldn't want to invade your sanctuary. Vanessa had the decency to look slightly ashamed, but not enough to speak up, not enough to say, wait, this is wrong, she's your mother. I walked out of that perfect house with its perfect couple and their perfect boundaries and stood on the sidewalk for a long time before I could force myself to walk. Through the front window, I could see David and Vanessa talking probably about how difficult I was being, how much drama I was bringing into their peaceful lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had spent years after Richard died telling myself I was strong, independent, that I didn't need anyone. Now, when I actually needed help, I discovered that independence is a luxury you can only afford when you have options. I walked to a cheap motel near the highway exit and spent almost all the cash I had left on a room for the night. Sitting on the hard bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, I tried to figure out where a 65-year-old woman with almost no money and only a suitcase of cheap clothes was supposed to go. It was then that I remembered the business card I had carried in my wallet for almost 40 years, miraculously saved because it was with me at the moment of the fire. yellowed with age and soft from being handled so much, a card I never thought I'd actually use, from a man I loved when the world was young and everything seemed possible. Robert Dalton, the man who promised to come back for me. One day, before life got in the way, and that day never came. I spent 3 nights in that cheap motel before I found the courage to make the call. 3 nights, waking up with back pain from the thin mattress and the taste of shame in my mouth. 3 nights, listening to fights in the hallway and the constant roar of traffic through the poorly insulated window. 3 nights washing my few new clothes in the tiny sink and hanging them to dry on the only chair in the room. The business card felt like tissue paper between my fingers, worn down by 4 decades of being carried but never used. Robert Rob Dalton was written in faded blue ink. Below that, a phone number with an area code I didn't recognize. On the back, in my own youthful handwriting, "Never forget G." I had written those words when I was 25, believing with the absolute certainty of youth that Rob Dalton would be the great love of my life. He was 26. With dark hair that fell over his forehead and eyes the color of golden amber. He worked for his father's construction company after college and dreamed of bigger things, of building something that mattered. We dated for 9 months, which at 25 felt like an eternity. He used to take me to the lookout point in the West Hills, where we would sit on the hood of his car and talk about our plans. "I'm going to start my own business," he would tell me. "Something in development, something that makes me rich enough to give you everything you deserve. I'll come back for you, Eleanor." He promised me the night before he left for a project in Seattle. "I'll make something of myself, and then I'll come back and marry you." But promises at 25 have a habit of fading when real life takes over. He wrote letters at first, long, passionate letters filled with dreams and plans. I replied, telling him about my job at the bank, about how I was waiting for him, just as promised. Then the letters became shorter, less frequent. When I met Richard 6 months later at a church social, Rob felt like a pretty dream I once had too good to be real. Richard was steady, reliable, already 32 with a good job at the telephone company. He didn't promise me the world, but he promised me a home, a family, security. When he proposed after 5 months of dating, I said yes. I put Rob's business card in the pocket of my wedding dress, a secret talisman I couldn't bring myself to throw away. Now, 40 years later, sitting in a cheap motel room that smelled of mildew and old smoke, I wondered what had become of that dreamer with the amber eyes. I had tracked him sporadically over the years, the way you do with first loves. Through mutual friends, I heard he had kept his promises. He had started a construction company. He had made it big. He never married, which surprised people. Too busy building his empire, they said. Dalton Development. The last I heard, maybe 8 years ago, his company had expanded beyond Portland to San Francisco and Seattle, building shopping centers and office complexes. The young man from the construction site had become the kind of man who wore expensive suits and made decisions that affected hundreds of people. What would that man want with a 65-year-old widow staying in a Fleabag motel with nothing but a suitcase of clothes from Target? The rational part of my brain said it was ridiculous. Pathetic, even. You don't call someone after 40 years because your life has fallen apart. You don't look for your high school boyfriend when you're old, desperate, and have nowhere to go. But rational thought is a luxury when you're counting the coins in your purse and trying to figure out if you have enough for one more night at the motel. On the 4th morning, I couldn't take it anymore. My back ached. The money was running out, and the front desk had already warned me they needed the room for a reservation arriving the next day. I sat at the tiny table in the room, staring at the card, my hands shaking from more than just the morning chill. What would he say? "Hello, Rob. Remember me? I'm homeless now. Can you help?" The number on the card was probably disconnected, or it would ring to some secretary who would politely inform me that Mr. Dalton was too important to take calls from random women claiming to know him from his youth. But what if it wasn't? What if he answered? My heart pounded as I dialed the number. Each digit felt like a step off a cliff. It rang once, twice. Dalton Development. Rob speaking. His voice was deeper now, shaped by time and responsibility, but unmistakably his. After 40 years, I would have recognized it anywhere. I almost hung up. I almost pressed the end call button and went to find some other solution. But something in his tone, some warmth that seemed to travel through the phone and wrap around me like a blanket made me speak. "Rob, it's Eleanor. Eleanor Miller. Well, I'm Eleanor Thompson now, but I used to be Miller. Silence. Long enough that I thought maybe the call had dropped, or maybe he had hung up, or maybe he had no idea who I was. Then, Eleanor. Just my name. Spoken like a prayer or a wonder. As if he couldn't believe it. I'm so sorry to call like this. I rushed on, the words tumbling over each other in my desperation to explain before he could hang up. I know it's been a long time, and I probably shouldn't be calling, but I didn't know who else. Where are you? His crisp voice interrupted me, sharp with concern. I'm in Lake Oswego, at a motel called the Rest Stop, and I know this sounds crazy, but my house burned down last week. I lost everything. And my son doesn't want me to stay with him. And I have nowhere to go. The words came out in a torrent, each one harder to say than the last. Admitting that your own son rejected you felt like admitting you had failed at the most fundamental part of being human. Give me the exact address, Rob said, his voice now completely professional. I'm coming to get you. You don't have to do that. I don't know why I called. I guess I just needed to hear a friendly voice. Eleanor. His tone allowed no argument. Tell me where you are. I'm walking to my car right now. Through the phone, I could hear the sound of a door closing, an engine starting. He was really coming. This man I hadn't spoken to in 40 years was dropping whatever important business he was doing to rescue me from a cheap motel. I gave him the address, my voice barely a whisper. Rob, I'm not the girl you remember. Neither am I, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. But I've been waiting 40 years for this call. After we hung up, I spent the next hour packing my few things, alternating between panic and disbelief. What was I doing? What were we doing? This was insanity. You couldn't just pick up after 4 decades as if you were continuing a conversation from yesterday. But as I looked out the motel window, waiting for a car I wouldn't recognize, carrying a man who might not recognize me, I felt something I hadn't felt since before the fire. Hope. Maybe it was foolish hope. Maybe it would lead to more disappointment, more heartbreak. But it was hope nonetheless. And at 65, with nothing left to lose, hope was worth the risk. At 10:45 exactly, a silver Mercedes pulled up in front of the motel, sleek and gleaming against the worn backdrop of the street. I watched through the window as the car parked, my heart beating against my ribs like a bird trying to escape its cage. The windows were tinted, so I couldn't see inside, but something deep in my chest told me it was him. The engine cut, and the driver's door opened. Even after 40 years, even with gray hair and lines around his eyes, even carrying the weight of decades I hadn't shared with him, I recognized him immediately. Rob Dalton stepped out of that car as if stepping out of my dreams, and when he looked up at the window where I stood, the years crumbled between us as if they had never existed. I grabbed my suitcase and went down the stairs with the haste of someone afraid a dream might vanish if they waited too long. He was standing by the car, waiting for me. Rob had the same easy confidence he had at 26, but now it was refined, polished by success and maturity. He wore dark jeans and a navy cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. But his eyes, those amber eyes that had haunted my dreams for decades, were exactly the same. I wanted to hide. I wanted to run back to the room and pretend this wasn't happening. I looked awful. My hair hadn't been cut in months. My cheap clothes were wrinkled. I felt small and insignificant compared to the elegant man waiting for me. But he was already smiling at me, a smile that made my heart skip just like I was 25 again. I approached him slowly, suddenly unable to breathe. "Hello, Rob," I said softly. Up close, I could see the changes time had made. His dark hair was now silver, cut short and professional. Lines marked the corners of his eyes and shaped his mouth. He was broader in the shoulders, solid, as if success had given him physical weight along with everything else. But when he smiled, I saw the young man who used to take me to the lookout and tell me his dreams. "Hello," I managed to say, my voice barely a whisper. He studied my face for a long moment, those amber eyes taking in every detail. I wanted to apologize for how I looked, for how far I had fallen, for calling him after all those years with nothing to offer but trouble. Instead, he said 3 words that changed everything. "You look beautiful." I started to cry. Right there on the sidewalk, in front of that cheap motel, with Rob Dalton standing next to me, I fell apart completely. 40 years of held-back tears, 4 days of uncertainty and despair, a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. Everything came out in ugly, gasping sobs I couldn't control. He didn't say anything else. He didn't try to hush me or tell me everything would be okay. He simply took my suitcase with one hand and wrapped his other arm around me as I collapsed against his chest. He smelled of expensive cologne and clean laundry, of success and stability, of everything I had lost and everything I never had. His sweater was soft against my cheek, and his arms were strong around my shaking shoulders. "I'm sorry," I gasped against his chest. "I'm sorry, Rob. I shouldn't have called. I shouldn't drag you into this mess." "Shh," he murmured, his hand stroking my back. "You should have called years ago." When the tears finally stopped, I pulled back to look at him, embarrassed by the damp spot I had left on his expensive sweater. I must look like a disaster. He reached out and wiped a tear from my cheek, his touch soft as a whisper. "You look like someone who has been through hell and survived. That's not a disaster, Eleanor. That's strength." I laughed, but it came out shaky and bitter. "Strength. I'm 65 years old. I'm staying in a 2-star motel because my own son doesn't want me. That's not strength. That's pathetic." His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I saw a flash of the anger he was trying to hide. "Your son is a fool. You don't know him." "I don't need to know him. I know you." He paused, his hand still resting gently on my shoulders. "Or at least, I knew you. And the Eleanor Miller I knew would never turn away someone in need, especially family." The way he said my maiden name, as if it were something precious he had kept all these years, made my chest ache with longing for the woman I used to be. "That was a long time ago," I said. "I'm not that girl anymore." "Maybe not," he agreed, "but I'd like to get to know the woman she became." He put my suitcase in the trunk of his luxury car as if it were a treasure, not a cheap bag containing everything I had left in the world. As he opened the passenger door for me, I stood momentarily paralyzed by the unreality of the situation. The morning of the fire, I had a house, memories, a life built over decades. Now I was getting into the car of a man I hadn't seen in 40 years, with no idea what would come next. "Where are we going?" I asked as he started the engine. "Home," he said simply. The drive took nearly an hour, passing through increasingly wealthy neighborhoods until we reached an area I had never seen before: Dunthorpe. Rolling hills dotted with estates hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Trees that looked like they had been professionally placed, mailboxes that probably cost more than most people's cars. Rob turned into a long driveway, marked only by a small brass plaque that read, "Dalton." The driveway curved through mature trees and manicured gardens before opening onto a circular drive in front of a house that took my breath away. It wasn't ostentatious or flashy. It was elegant in the way real money is elegant, understated, secure, built to last. Stone and timber, with tall windows catching the afternoon light and a porch that invited you to sit and stay a while. "Rob," I whispered, looking at this monument to everything he had achieved. This is incredible." He parked the car but didn't get out immediately. Instead, he sat there looking at the house as if seeing it through my eyes. "It's too big," he said quietly. "Always has been. I built it thinking that one day I'd fill it, but—" He shrugged, a gesture so familiar it made my heart ache. "Some dreams don't work out the way you plan. You never married?" The question slipped out before I could stop it. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. I came close a couple of times, but something was always missing. He hesitated for an instant, then said simply, "You." The word hung between us in the silent car, heavy with 40 years of what-ifs and could-have-beens. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to understand how I could have been absent in a life I was never part of. But before I could find the words, he was already getting out of the car, walking around to open my door. The house was even more impressive inside. Hardwood floors that glowed like honey, high ceilings, furniture that looked like it belonged in architectural digests but didn't feel cold or museum-like. There were books everywhere, comfortable reading chairs placed near windows, photos scattered on side tables. It felt like a home where someone actually lived, not just a showcase for success. "Are you hungry?" Rob asked, leading me to a kitchen that was larger than my entire old living room. "I was just about to make lunch when you called." I realized I was starving. The motel breakfast had been just stale pastries and weak coffee, and my stomach was cramping from emptiness and nerves. "I don't want to be any trouble," I started, but he cut me off with a look. "Eleanor, stop. You are not trouble. You are. He paused, searching for the words. You are the answer to a question I've been asking for 40 years. While he cooked, and he actually knew how to cook, moving around that massive kitchen with the ease of someone who had learned to take care of himself, I studied the photographs scattered around the room. Rob at ribbon-cutting ceremonies, shaking hands with important people. Rob with various women at charity galas and business dinners, always smiling, but never looking entirely happy. Tell me about your life, he said, placing a plate of perfectly roasted chicken and vegetables in front of me. Tell me about Richard, about your son, about everything I missed. So I did. Over a lunch that tasted like heaven after days of horrible motel food, I told him about my marriage to Richard. Richard, steady and comfortable, who gave me security and companionship, if not passion. About David, the baby I had wanted so desperately and loved so fiercely, who grew up to be a stranger who valued his girlfriend's comfort over his mother's needs. I told him about the years of being a good wife, a good mother, a good widow, about the fire that had taken everything I owned, and the son who had taken everything I had left. Rob listened without interrupting, his amber eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm sorry about Richard, about your house, about your son, but I'm not sorry you called me. Why? The question came out smaller than I intended. He reached across the table and took my hand in his, still strong, still gentle, still capable of making my heart race after all these years. Because I never stopped loving you, he said quietly. Because every deal I made, every success I achieved, every dollar I earned, it was all so that I could be worthy of you when you came back to me. Rob, I know this sounds crazy. I know 40 years is a long time and we're different people now. But when I heard your voice on that phone today, it was like the missing piece of my life finally clicked into place. I looked at our joined hands, his tan and manicured, mine worn by work and showing every day of my 65 years. I'm not the girl you remember. He disagreed. You're better. You're real. You've lived and loved and lost and survived. That 25-year-old girl was pretty, but she was just potential. You are the woman that potential became. The words settled around my heart like a warm blanket, healing wounds I didn't even know I still carried. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt seen not as someone's mother or someone's wife or someone's burden, but as myself. What happens now? I asked. Rob smiled, that same devastating smile that made me fall for him when the world was young. Now we find out what the rest of our lives look like together, if you'll have me. Sitting in his beautiful kitchen filled with good food and possibility, I realized that sometimes the fire that destroys your old life is just making room for the life you were always meant to have. Living with Rob was like discovering a version of myself I had forgotten existed. The first week was strange, tiptoeing around each other like polite strangers sharing space. He gave me the entire guest suite of his house, a room larger than my old living room, a private bathroom with a tub that could fit 2 people, and a small sitting area overlooking his gardens. I felt like I was staying at a luxury resort, afraid to touch anything or leave too much evidence of my presence, but Rob was patient in the way successful men learn to be, and gradually I began to relax. He had a housekeeper, Carmen, who came 3 days a week, but the other days he found me cooking for him. It started small, making coffee in the morning, preparing simple lunches, but Rob appreciated everything with the enthusiasm of someone who had eaten buffet meals and restaurant food for decades. "This is amazing," he said one night, savoring the pot roast I had made using my grandmother's recipe. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this in years." "It's nothing fancy," I protested. But inside, I was glowing. When was the last time anyone had appreciated my cooking? David used to complain that I made the same 5 dishes over and over. Vanessa once suggested I try more contemporary flavor profiles for family dinners. Rob shook his head. "It's perfect. You are perfect." That word perfect should have made me uncomfortable. I was 65 with gray roots showing and expression lines that had become permanent grooves. My hands were spotted with age, my body soft in places that used to be firm. I was anything but perfect. But when Rob looked at me, I saw myself reflected in his eyes as someone beautiful, someone worthy of love and attention and gentle care. We fell into routines that felt as natural as breathing. We had breakfast together on the back porch, where Rob read business reports, and I watched the birds at his elaborate feeders. We walked in the afternoon around the property, where he showed me the gardens he had planted himself and the greenhouse where he grew orchids as a hobby. Evenings were for talking. We had 40 years to catch up on, and we did it slowly, carefully, like archaeologists examining precious artifacts. I told him how hard it had been losing Richard, about the emptiness of the house in the months that followed, about how I had to force myself out of bed every morning, about the loneliness of widowhood, the way people treat you like half a person once your husband is gone. He told me about his business, how it had grown from a small construction firm to a development empire with projects in 3 states. About the women he dated over the years, smart, accomplished women who looked perfect beside him at charity galas, but who never made him feel whole. There was one woman, he said one night as we sat by his fireplace, the Oregon rain tapping against the windows. Helen. She was an architect, brilliant, beautiful. Everyone said we were perfect for each other. I felt a pang of jealousy that surprised me with its intensity. What happened? I proposed, he said quietly. Christmas Eve, 5 years ago. Big production, restaurant overlooking the city, expensive ring, everything she said she wanted, and she said yes. We planned the wedding for the following summer, but as the date got closer, I kept having this feeling that something was wrong. Not with her, she was everything anyone could want in a wife, but with me. He paused, staring into the fire. The night before the wedding, I called it off. Rob, no. What did you tell her? The truth. He looked at me, his eyes serious. That I was still in love with a woman I had met 40 years ago, and it wouldn't be fair to marry her while my heart belonged to someone else. The words hit me like a physical blow. You canceled your wedding because of me? Because of the memory of me? Because of the possibility that one day, somehow, I might need you and you'd be here waiting? I stared at him, this successful, handsome man who could have had anyone, and tried to process what he was telling me. This is crazy, I said. It is. He leaned forward, taking my hands in his. It's crazier than you, keeping my business card in your wallet for 40 years? He was right. Sure, we were both crazy. We were both living with the ghosts of what could have been, but somehow, against all odds, our particular brand of insanity had brought us back together. 3 weeks after my arrival, David called. I was in Rob's kitchen making dinner and humming to myself, actually humming, something I hadn't done in years when my phone rang. David's name on the screen made my stomach clench with familiar anxiety. Hello, dear, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Mom. His tone was strange, carefully controlled. I've been trying to call you. Your phone keeps going straight to voicemail. That was true. I had been screening my calls, not ready to deal with whatever guilt or obligation David might impose on me. I've been busy. Busy doing what? I heard you checked out of the motel weeks ago. Where are you living? I looked around Rob's beautiful kitchen, at the fresh flowers he had brought home that morning, at the expensive wine glasses on the counter. I'm staying with a friend. What friend? Mom, you don't have friends with money. His assumption offended me, partly because it had been true for so long after Richard's death. I had let most of my friendships fade, too tired and too proud to maintain relationships when I had nothing to offer in return. You'd be surprised, I said coolly. There was a pause, and I could practically hear him processing that information. Mom, I think we need to talk. Vanessa and I have been discussing the situation, and we think maybe we were too hasty. Maybe you could stay in our guest room for a while, just until you get back on your feet. The offer that would have meant everything to me a month ago now felt hollow, insulting even. What made you change your mind? Another pause. We realized that maybe we were too focused on our own needs. Family should stick together. What he meant, I realized, was that he had probably heard through the neighborhood gossip network that his mother wasn't staying at a cheap motel anymore. Someone had mentioned seeing her with a well-dressed man in an expensive car. David was curious, and curiosity had made him generous. That's very kind of you, I said, but I'm perfectly happy where I am. Mom, you can't just move in with a stranger. It's not safe. What do you know about this person? I know he has never made me feel like a burden, I said quietly. I know he values my company and appreciates my cooking and tells me I'm beautiful every day. The wedding wasn't like my first. When I married Richard 40 years ago, it was all about what others expected. White dress, church ceremony, reception at the community center with a DJ and a cash bar. We invited everyone we knew and several people we didn't particularly like because that was the done thing. We performed the ritual for the community, not for ourselves. This time, Rob and I did exactly what we wanted. The ceremony took place in his back garden on a crisp November morning, 5 months after that phone call from the motel. The officiant was an old friend of Rob's, and the only witnesses were Carmen, the housekeeper, and Miguel, Rob's business partner and best friend for 25 years. I wore a simple blue dress that Rob said matched my eyes, and he wore a gray suit that made him look distinguished and handsome. No showing off, no ostentation, no stress of impressing anyone. Just two people who had found each other again after 4 decades, promising to spend whatever time they had left together. David came to the wedding. I had debated whether to even invite him, but Rob convinced me to try one more time. "He's your son," he said simply. "You'll regret it if you don't give him the chance to do the right thing." So I called him 2 weeks before the ceremony. "Rob and I are getting married," I said bluntly. "November 15th, at 2 p.m. You are welcome to come, but Vanessa is not invited." He showed up alone, looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly shopping budget. He shook Rob's hand politely, made appropriate small talk, and even managed to smile when the officiant declared us husband and wife. But I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he was inventorying Rob's house, his car, the obvious markers of wealth. This morning, I woke up in Rob's arms and my husband's arms in the bedroom that became ours, in the house that became our home. Sunlight streamed through the windows overlooking the gardens we tend together, and I could smell the coffee Rob makes every morning before I wake up. At 66 years old, I am happier than I have ever been, not because of Rob's money or his beautiful house or his success, but because someone sees me, really sees me, and chooses to love what they see. The fire took my old life, consumed it, and turned it into ash. But sometimes I think, as I watch Rob reading his morning newspaper across the breakfast table, that destruction is just another word for renewal. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you wanted to find everything you actually needed. And sometimes, if you are very lucky, first love gets a second chance to become forever love. The business card I kept for 40 years is framed now, sitting on Rob's desk in his office. A reminder that some promises are worth keeping, even when it takes 4 decades to fulfill them. If you like this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our videos. And if you want to support us even more, consider becoming a channel member. You'll have access to exclusive content and help our community grow. Thanks for watching until the end. Yeah.